The courthouse buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. People rushed through security, lawyers clutched coffee cups, and the echoing halls filled with whispers of hope and worry. Among them walked Mei Lin, her steps quiet but purposeful, her simple gray suit and minimal makeup making her nearly invisible in the crowd. Mei wasn't like the other attorneys who strutted through these halls. No designer briefcase, no flashy watch, no trail of interns hanging on her every word. Just a worn leather bag packed with meticulously organized files, and eyes that missed nothing. At 32, she'd spent the last 5 years working at a small community legal aid office taking cases nobody else wanted. "Morning, Mei," called the security guard as she passed through the metal detector. "Back for another round with the sharks?" Mei smiled softly. "Someone has to swim with them, Joe." Today's case wasn't one she could turn down, even though everyone at her office had warned her about Judge Richard Powell. The Rodriguez family, hard-working parents with 3 young children and a grandmother battling cancer, were facing eviction from their home of 15 years. Their landlord, Bluestone Properties, claimed lease violations, but Mei had discovered the truth. The building was slated for luxury renovations once all the current tenants were pushed out. The elevator doors opened to the 3rd floor. Mei checked her watch, 30 minutes early, as always. She preferred to settle in the courtroom before anyone else arrived, to breathe in the space and gather her thoughts. But as she approached courtroom 3C, she heard voices. Through the partially open door, she saw Judge Powell already seated at the bench, leaning forward in animated conversation with Thomas Wells, the expensively dressed attorney representing Bluestone Properties. "Golf game still on for Saturday?" Wells was saying, his voice casual and friendly. "Claire's looking forward to having Diana over for lunch while we hit the links." Judge Powell laughed. "Wouldn't miss it, though I might need a rain check on those cigars you promised. Doctor's orders." Mei froze, her hand gripping her bag tighter. This wasn't just friendly chatter. This was the opposing counsel and the judge, discussing their personal plans, their wives' friendship. Her stomach sank. The rumors about Powell's connections to real estate developers weren't just courthouse gossip. She backed away silently, found a bench in the hallway, and quickly jotted notes about what she'd witnessed. This would explain the judge's reputation. Everyone knew Powell rarely ruled against development companies, but proving bias was nearly impossible. Now she had something concrete. Not enough for a recusal motion yet, but a start. At exactly 8:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled hearing, Mei walked confidently into the courtroom. Both men looked up, surprise briefly flickering across. The judge's face before his expression hardened into indifference. "Good morning, Your Honor," Mei said politely, setting her bag on the defense table. "I believe we haven't met. I'm Mei Lin, representing the Rodriguez family." Judge Powell barely nodded, immediately returning to his conversation with Wells as if she hadn't spoken. Mei caught fragments about property values and cleaning up the neighborhood as she organized her materials. Neither man bothered to lower their voices. The courtroom gradually filled. The Rodriguez family arrived, Mr. Rodriguez in his only suit, Mrs. Rodriguez clutching a folder of rent receipts they'd carefully saved, their teenage daughter translating quietly for her grandmother. Mei greeted them warmly, explaining what would happen and reassuring them when they nervously eyed the judge still chatting with the Bluestone lawyer. At precisely 9 muag, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Powell straightened his robes and picked up the case file as if seeing it for the first time. "Bluestone Properties versus Rodriguez," he read with barely disguised boredom. "Eviction proceedings." He looked up, eyes scanning the room before landing on Mei with a slight frown. "Counselors, identify yourselves for the record." Wells stood, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. "Thomas Wells, Your Honor, representing Bluestone Properties." "Thank you, Mr. Wells. Good to see you again." The judge's tone was warm, familiar. Mei rose. "Mei Lin, Your Honor, Legal Aid Services, representing the Rodriguez family." Judge Powell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Legal aid? Isn't this a simple eviction case? Seems like a waste of taxpayer resources." Heat rose to Mei's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. The case involves several complex issues, Your Honor, including potential violations of housing codes and discriminatory practices. The judge waved his hand dismissively. Let's not complicate things unnecessarily, Ms. Lynn, was it? Mr. Wells, please present your client's case. Wells launched into a polished presentation, complete with glossy photographs of alleged lease violations. Minor issues like a bicycle chained to a stairwell railing and a small garden planted along the building's side. As he spoke, Judge Powell nodded approvingly, occasionally asking friendly questions that allowed Wells to strengthen his arguments. When May's turn came, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted noticeably. Before she could complete her first sentence, the judge interrupted. Ms. Lynn, are you new to housing court? These proceedings are meant to be expedient. Please stick to relevant facts. Yes, Your Honor. The relevant facts include the timing of these alleged violations in relation to Bluestone's renovation plans, which— Objection, Wells called out lazily. Speculation about my client's business plans is irrelevant to these proceedings. Sustained, Judge Powell said immediately, without even glancing at May. Ms. Lynn, please confine yourself to responding directly to the violation claims. For the next 20 minutes, this pattern continued. Each time May attempted to introduce evidence of the landlord's true motivations or the Rodriguez family's consistent payment history, either Wells objected or the judge cut her off. When she tried to present maintenance requests that had been ignored by the landlord, which would support their counterclaim, Judge Powell sighed loudly. Your Honor, if I may, May persisted, her voice quiet but determined. Housing law clearly establishes that landlords cannot retaliate against tenants who request repairs by filing for eviction. These documents show— Ms. Lynn, the judge interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps in your limited experience you haven't learned that this court doesn't have time for fishing expeditions. The issue before us is whether the Rodriguez family violated their lease, not whether they're happy with their living conditions. A few lawyers waiting for other cases snickered. Wells didn't even bother to hide his smirk. In the gallery, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered to her husband, worry creasing her brow. But May remained outwardly calm, though her heart pounded. For the record, Your Honor, I'm requesting that all maintenance communications be entered as exhibits. The judge sighed dramatically. Fine, mark them, but I'm giving them very little weight. As May presented the Rodriguez family's defense, she became increasingly aware of the judge's tactics. He checked his watch repeatedly, shuffled papers while she spoke, and asked Wells clarifying questions while interrupting May with impatient demands to move along or get to the point. When Mrs. Rodriguez took the stand to testify about their tenancy, Judge Powell seemed to deliberately use complex legal terminology, speaking rapidly without giving the nervous woman time to process his questions. When she hesitated or looked to her daughter for translation help, he made a show of his frustration. We don't have all day, Mrs. Rodriguez. A simple yes or no will suffice. May watched the family's dignity being stripped away by the judge's deliberate humiliation. She had expected opposition, but not this blatant disrespect. As she observed Judge Powell's smug exchanges with Wells, something shifted inside her. The quiet attorney who typically spoke only when necessary felt a new resolve hardening like steel. During a brief recess, while the Rodriguez family huddled anxiously in the hallway, May stayed behind, pretending to organize papers. She overheard. Wells approached the bench. Richard, he said quietly, Bluestone is hoping to wrap this up quickly. The development timeline— Don't worry, the judge replied, his voice low. These legal aid types always fold when pushed. She's in over her head. May kept her eyes down, adding this exchange to her mental record. They had underestimated her, seeing only a quiet woman easy to dismiss. They hadn't noticed her methodically documenting every procedural irregularity, every biased remark, every inappropriate exchange. When court resumed, Judge Powell looked at May with undisguised impatience. Ms. Lynn, I hope you can conclude your presentation quickly. The court has other matters on its calendar. May nodded, gathering her notes. Just one more witness, Your Honor. She called forward Mr. Rodriguez's employer, who testified about his character and reliability. As the testimony concluded, Judge Powell leaned forward. Well, Ms. Lynn, I've heard nothing today that would prevent me from ruling immediately in favor of Bluestone Properties. Unless you have something substantial to add? The courtroom fell silent. Wells was already packing up his briefcase. Victory, assumed. The Rodriguez family looked defeated, their daughter whispering translations that made her grandmother bow her head in despair. May stood, her posture straight, her voice quiet but clear. Your Honor, we request a continuance to present additional evidence regarding discriminatory practices at multiple Bluestone properties, including communications between management specifically targeting tenants of certain ethnic backgrounds. Wells's head snapped up. The judge's smug expression faltered slightly. Additionally, May continued, meeting the judge's eyes directly for the first time, we'll be filing a motion regarding certain procedural concerns that have arisen during today's hearing. Her meaning was clear to both men. She had witnessed their pre-court conversation. She had documented the bias. She wasn't backing down. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks, Judge Powell announced abruptly, bringing down his gavel before Wells could object. Parties are instructed to submit all additional evidence within 10 days. As the courtroom emptied, May gathered her materials unhurriedly. The battle had just begun, but something had shifted. The judge had expected to embarrass her into submission. Instead, he'd awakened something he never anticipated, the quiet determination of a woman who knew exactly what justice required. For the next 2 weeks, May barely slept. Her small apartment became a war room, legal books stacked on every surface, yellow sticky notes covering her walls, and multiple coffee cups gathering at her elbow as she worked late into the night. This case had become more than just helping the Rodriguez family. It was about exposing a system that had been corrupted right under everyone's noses. Her boss at Legal Aid, Helen, knocked on her office door 3 days before the next hearing. You look terrible, she said bluntly, dropping a sandwich on May's desk. Eat something. May rubbed her eyes. Thanks. I'm fine. Helen perched on the edge of the desk, moving aside a tower of housing regulations. The Rodriguez case is becoming all-consuming. Are you sure this is worth it? We could help them find another place, negotiate a settlement? That's exactly what Powell and Bluestone want, May replied, unwrapping the sandwich. They want the Rodriguez family gone, along with every other tenant in that building who doesn't fit their luxury living vision. And Powell's been helping developers like them for years. Helen sighed. You're right. But going after a judge is dangerous, May. Powell has friends in high places. So do I, May said with a small smile. I've been making some calls. Those calls had led her to former tenants of other Bluestone properties, court reporters who had witnessed Powell's bias firsthand, and even a clerk at the county records office who had quietly pointed May toward property transactions between Powell's brother-in-law and Bluestone's parent company. The morning of the hearing arrived with a thunderstorm that drenched the city. May arrived early as usual, this time with 2 rolling briefcases and a young law student named David who had volunteered to help. The Rodriguez family huddled together under a shared umbrella, looking nervous but determined. Remember, May told them quietly, no matter what happens in there today, you've already won by standing up for yourselves. When they entered the courtroom, it was significantly more crowded than before. Word had spread about a legal aid attorney challenging Judge Powell, and several lawyers had found reasons to attend. May also spotted a woman in the back row taking notes, a reporter from the local paper who had become interested after May's anonymous tip. Wells entered with his usual swagger, now accompanied by a senior partner from his firm. They looked confident, exchanging friendly nods with the judge as he took the bench. Powell's eyes narrowed when he saw May's expanded legal team in the filled gallery. Good morning, he said tersely. I see we have quite an audience today. Let me remind everyone that this is a simple eviction proceeding, not a theatrical performance. He glared at May. Ms. Lynn, I hope you're prepared to be concise. Yes, Your Honor, May replied politely. Though I should mention this is no longer a simple eviction proceeding. We've filed counterclaims under the Fair Housing Act and state anti-discrimination statutes. Wells jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. These counterclaims are a desperate delay tactic with no basis in fact. Judge Powell nodded. I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Wells. Ms. Lynn, what possible evidence could you have for such serious allegations? This was the opening May had been waiting for. I'm glad you asked, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to present our evidence systematically. Before Powell could object, May nodded to David, who began distributing document packets to the court clerk, opposing counsel, and the judge. The packets were 3 inches thick. These materials include sworn affidavits from 17 former tenants of Bluestone Properties, documenting a pattern of discriminatory practices, May explained, her quiet voice somehow commanding attention. You'll also find maintenance records showing dramatic disparities in response times based on tenants' surnames and national origins. The judge flipped through the packet with increasing agitation. Ms. Lynn, this is excessive. The court doesn't have time to review all of this today. I understand, Your Honor, May replied smoothly. That's why we've provided a summary on page 3 with indexed references to the supporting evidence. If you'll turn to that page. For the next hour, May methodically presented her case. Each time Powell tried to cut her off, she politely referenced specific legal precedents that entitled her clients to present their full defense and counterclaims. When Wells objected, she calmly cited the applicable rules of procedure that supported her. The audience watched in fascination as the dynamic shifted. The judge, who had so confidently dismissed May before, now appeared increasingly uncomfortable. When he attempted to rush her, she would pause and say, "For the record, I'd like to note that I'm being asked to accelerate my presentation of evidence regarding discriminatory housing practices." The reporter in the back scribbled furiously. During a particularly tense exchange, Powell interrupted her again. "Ms. Lynn, I'm not sure where you received your legal training, but your interpretation of the relevant statutes is questionable at best." The courtroom went silent. This direct attack on her credentials was beyond unprofessional. Wells smirked, clearly expecting May to crumble under the insult. Instead, she smiled slightly. "I received my JD from Georgetown Law, Your Honor, where I specialized in housing law and served as an editor of the Law Review. I'm happy to provide my credentials for the record if they're relevant to these proceedings." Someone in the gallery coughed to cover a laugh. The judge's face flushed dark red. "That won't be necessary," he snapped. "Continue with your presentation." May turned to her most powerful evidence. "I'd like to call our next witness, Carlos Vega." A middle-aged man in a maintenance uniform approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, he nervously glanced at the Bluestone attorneys. "Mr. Vega, what is your position?" May asked gently. "I've been head maintenance man at the Parkview Apartments, that's a Bluestone building, for 12 years now," he replied. "And have you ever received instructions about how to handle maintenance requests from different tenants?" Wells leapt up. "Objection, hearsay and irrelevant." "Your Honor," May responded immediately. "Mr. Vega's testimony goes directly to the pattern and practice of discrimination we've alleged in our counterclaim. As an employee acting within the scope of his employment, his testimony about instructions he received is admissible under the party admission exception to hearsay." Judge Powell hesitated, visibly calculating the risks. With the reporter present and the gallery watching closely, he reluctantly said, "Overruled. The witness may answer." Carlos straightened his shoulders. "Yes. About 3 years ago, when the new management took over, they gave us a system. Green forms were for priority tenants. They said fix those problems same day. Yellow forms were standard, 2 to 3 days. Red forms they told us not to rush on, could take up to 2 weeks. And how were tenants assigned to these different categories, May asked. They said it was based on tenant history, but he paused, looking down. All the Asian and Latino families got red forms, every time. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The Rodriguez family clasped hands, their suspicions confirmed. "Mr. Vega, did you keep any records of these color-coded forms?" He nodded. "I kept copies of all work orders for my own records. Never felt right the way they were treating people." As Carlos's testimony continued, Judge Powell's demeanor changed from dismissive to concerned. He began watching the gallery nervously, particularly the reporter. When Wells aggressively cross-examined Carlos, attempting to discredit him, Powell, actually sustained one of May's objections about badgering the witness. By mid-afternoon, the momentum had clearly shifted. When May introduced documents showing the financial connections between Bluestone's parent company and a real estate investment trust that included Powell's brother-in-law as a primary beneficiary, the judge finally seemed to realize the danger he was in. "Ms. Lynn," he interrupted, "may I see counsel in chambers?" Behind closed doors, Wells exploded. "This is preposterous. She's turning a simple eviction into a circus and making insinuations about Your Honor's integrity." Judge Powell rubbed his temples. "Mr. Wells, please calm down." May stood quietly, waiting. The judge turned to her. "Ms. Lynn, what exactly are you seeking here? Surely we can resolve this without further spectacle." She met his gaze steadily. "My clients want 3 things, Your Honor. First, they want to remain in their home with a new 5-year lease at current rates. Second, they want Bluestone to implement a non-discrimination policy with regular audits by a third party. Third," she paused, "they want your recusal from this case and all future Bluestone cases due to the conflict of interest we've documented." Wells sputtered in outrage, but Powell silenced him with a raised hand. The judge studied May for a long moment, seeing for the first time not a meek, easy target, but a formidable opponent who had outmaneuvered him completely. "If I were to agree to recuse myself," he said carefully, "what about the documentation you've collected?" "That would depend on the outcome for my clients," May replied evenly, "and whether similar cases in your court are reviewed for potential bias." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Powell cleared his throat. "After careful consideration of the complex issues raised today, I've determined that I should recuse myself from this matter to avoid any appearance of impropriety. This case will be reassigned to another judge immediately." The gallery burst into whispers. The Rodriguez family looked at May in confusion, not understanding this sudden victory. "Furthermore," Powell continued, his voice strained, "I'm issuing a stay on the eviction proceedings until the new judge can review all evidence properly." As the courtroom emptied, Wells cornered May in the hallway. "You think you're clever, don't you? This isn't over. Bluestone has resources you can't imagine." May looked at him calmly. "So do I, Mr. Wells. The difference is, mine include the truth and the law." She turned away, joining the Rodriguez family who waited nearby. "What happens now?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked anxiously. "Now," May said with a small smile, "we prepare for round 2, but we'll be fighting on level ground." As they walked through the courthouse lobby, several attorneys approached May, introducing themselves, offering congratulations or assistance. The quiet woman whom everyone had underestimated had just accomplished what many thought impossible. She had exposed corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years, and she had done it not with grand speeches or aggressive tactics, but with meticulous preparation and unshakable resolve. The storm outside had cleared, and sunlight broke through the clouds as they descended the courthouse steps. For the first time in weeks, May felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The battle wasn't over, but today, David had stood up to Goliath, and Goliath had blinked first. News of Judge Powell's unexpected recusal spread through the legal community like wildfire. By the next morning, May's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Former defendants from Powell's courtroom, other legal aid attorneys, and even a representative from the State Bar Association all wanted details. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Judge steps down from case amid conflict of interest allegations." But May knew this was just the beginning. Bluestone Properties wasn't going to give up a multi-million-dollar redevelopment project because of one setback, and Judge Powell had powerful friends who wouldn't appreciate his embarrassment becoming public. 3 days after the hearing, May was working late at the legal aid office when Helen rushed in. "Have you seen this?" she asked, dropping a court filing on May's desk. May scanned the document and felt her stomach tighten. Bluestone had filed an emergency motion claiming the Rodriguez family had violated a previously overlooked clause in their lease by operating a business from their apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez occasionally sold homemade tamales to neighbors on weekends to help with her mother's medical bills. "They're not backing down," Helen said. and they've requested Judge Harriman for the reassignment. May frowned. Harriman? He's Powell's golfing buddy. Exactly. They're working the system trying to get another friendly face on the bench. The next morning, May filed her own motion requesting that Judge Harriman also recuse himself due to his close personal relationship with Judge Powell. She attached photographs from the country club newsletter showing the two judges together at various social events. By noon, her phone rang. It was the court clerk. Ms. Lin, your case has been assigned to Judge Diane Chen. She's scheduled a hearing for Monday at 9 a.m. May allowed herself a small smile. Judge Chen had a reputation for being tough but scrupulously fair, with no known ties to real estate developers. This might actually be a level playing field. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. May visited the Rodriguez family to prepare them for the next round. Their apartment was small but immaculate, filled with family photos and the delicious smell of home cooking. They say I broke rules by selling tamales, Mrs. Rodriguez said worriedly, her hands twisting in her apron. Maybe I should stop. No, May replied firmly. What you do is a neighborly service, not a commercial business. There's no signage, no advertising, no business license. You're just sharing your cooking and accepting contributions to help with. Your mother's care will make that clear to the judge. Mr. Rodriguez poured coffee for everyone. We heard that Powell is very angry. My cousin works as a janitor at the courthouse, and he overheard Powell talking about making an example of you, Ms. Lin. May nodded, unsurprised. Let him try. We have truth on our side. But as she left their building, May noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running. When she turned to look directly at it, the car pulled away quickly. Chill ran down her spine. She was making powerful enemies. Monday arrived with an unexpected complication. As May approached the courthouse steps, a hand-delivered envelope was thrust toward her by a courier. Inside was a letter from the state's largest law firm, offering her an associate position with a starting salary 3 times what she made it. Legal aid, contingent on her immediate withdrawal from all current cases due to the firm's potential conflicts of interest. May crumpled the letter and dropped it into a trash can. The bribe was both insulting and revealing. They were getting desperate. The new courtroom had a different energy. Judge Chen, a composed woman in her 50s, reviewed the case files with careful attention while the attorneys settled in. The keyword gallery was even more crowded than before, with several law students and a different newspaper reporter present. Wells entered with not just the senior partner from before, but now a full team of 4 attorneys. They spread out at their table like an occupying force, expensive briefcases and laptops creating a wall of corporate power. Judge Chen looked up. Good morning. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. I've reviewed the history of this case, including the unusual recusal. Let me be perfectly transparent. I have no personal or financial connections to either party, and I expect these proceedings to adhere strictly to legal standards with no extraneous theatrics. Is that understood? Both sides nodded. Good. Now, Mr. Wells, as the moving party on this emergency motion, you may begin. Wells approached the podium with practiced confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. Bluestone Properties has recently discovered a clear violation of the lease agreement that renders all other considerations moot. Paragraph 17B explicitly prohibits the operation of businesses within residential units, and we have evidence that the Rodriguez family has been running a food service enterprise from their apartment. He displayed photographs of Mrs. Rodriguez, handing paper bags to neighbors in exchange for cash. Furthermore, Wells continued, this unauthorized food preparation creates health hazards for other tenants and liability issues for the property owner. We ask for immediate enforcement of the eviction order based on this material breach alone. Judge Chen turned to May. Ms. Lin, your response? May approached the podium calmly. She had expected this attack and was prepared. Your Honor, what Mr. Wells dramatically calls a food service enterprise is actually a grandmother occasionally sharing her traditional family recipes with neighbors who appreciate her cooking. Mrs. Rodriguez accepts small contributions to help with her mother's medical expenses, but this is a cultural practice of community support, not a commercial business. May placed her own photographs on the display. The Rodriguez kitchen, spotlessly clean. Mrs. Rodriguez cooking with her mother and daughter, 3 generations preserving family traditions. Neighbors gathered in the building's community room sharing a meal. The lease prohibits commercial businesses, defined in paragraph 2D as operations with regular hours, commercial signage, advertising, licenses, employees, or customer foot traffic. None of these elements exist here. This is Bluestone's attempt to criminalize cultural practices they find inconvenient to their redevelopment plans. Judge Chen studied the photographs. Mr. Wells, does your client apply this interpretation consistently? Are other residents who say, babysit a neighbor's child for payment or tutor students in their apartments also served with eviction notices? Wells shifted uncomfortably. Each situation is evaluated independently, Your Honor. I see, Judge Chen said neutrally. Let's move on to the broader issues in this case. For the next 2 hours, the legal battle unfolded with Judge Chen allowing both sides to present their arguments fully. Unlike Judge Powell, she asked probing questions of both attorneys and showed no favoritism. When Wells attempted to dismiss May's discrimination evidence, Chen pressed him for specific rebuttals rather than general denials. During a brief recess, May noticed something unusual. A distinguished older man had entered the courtroom and taken a seat in the back row. She recognized him immediately, Justice William Torres of the State Supreme Court. His presence was remarkable and sent a clear message. This case was being watched from the highest levels. When proceedings resumed, Wells seemed to have noticed Justice Torres as well. His aggressive tone moderated, and he began making small concessions about possible misunderstandings and Bluestone's commitment to diverse communities. Judge Chen wasn't having it. Mr. Wells, are you modifying your client's position? We're simply acknowledging that perceptions can differ, Your Honor. While maintaining that our actions were legally justified, Bluestone is always open to resolving matters amicably. Chen turned to May. Ms. Lin, would your clients be interested in settlement discussions at this point? May glanced at the Rodriguez family. We would consider good faith proposals, Your Honor. But any resolution must address the systemic issues we've raised, not just my client's individual situation. Judge Chen nodded. I'm ordering both parties to participate in a settlement conference tomorrow morning with Magistrate Judge Hoffman. If no agreement is reached, we'll resume these proceedings in the afternoon, at which point I'll rule on both the emergency motion and the discrimination counterclaims. As the courtroom emptied, Justice Torres approached May. Impressive advocacy, Counselor, he said quietly. Thank you, Justice Torres, May replied, surprised. May I ask why the Supreme Court is interested in an eviction case? He smiled slightly. Let's just say there's been concern about certain patterns in housing court for some time. Sometimes, it takes one persistent voice to bring attention to problems others have ignored. He handed her a card. Call my clerk if you encounter any unusual obstacles. The next morning, May arrived at the settlement conference to find the entire dynamic had changed. Instead of Wells, Bluestone's general counsel himself was present along with the company's CEO. They looked grim. We're prepared to offer the following, the general counsel began without preamble. A new 5-year lease for the Rodriguez family, at current rates a fund to address building maintenance with tenant oversight and implementation of a transparent system for addressing tenant concerns. May kept her expression neutral despite her shock. And the other residents facing similar eviction proceedings? All current eviction actions will be withdrawn, and no tenant will face eviction for redevelopment purposes for at least 5 years. It was a complete capitulation, far more than she had expected. May I ask what prompted this change of heart? The CEO cleared his throat. Let's just say we've received calls from several investors concerned about potential regulatory scrutiny and negative publicity. Bluestone values its reputation. May suspected there was more to it. Perhaps Justice Torres had made some calls of his own, but she wasn't going to question this victory. I'll need these terms in writing, with specific enforcement mechanisms and regular compliance reviews, she said. By that afternoon, the settlement was finalized and presented to Judge Chen, who approved it with a knowing look at May. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, but May gently declined interviews, directing them to the written statement she had prepared. The Rodriguez family was overjoyed. "How can we ever thank you?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, tears in her eyes. May smiled. "You already have. By having the courage to stand up for yourselves, you've helped change the system for everyone." That evening, as May packed up her office, Helen appeared in her doorway. "You've become quite the celebrity. 3 other tenants' rights organizations have called asking if you'd consult on similar cases." "I'm not interested in celebrity," May replied. "But if I can help others fight the same battles, then yes." "Oh, and there's one more thing," Helen added with a sly smile. "The Judicial Conduct Committee has opened a formal investigation into Judge Powell. Apparently, multiple complaints have suddenly been filed by attorneys who found their courage after watching you." May sat back in her chair, a wave of satisfaction washing over her. She had entered Judge Powell's courtroom as a target for his contempt and ridicule. He had seen her quiet demeanor as weakness, her modesty as incompetence. He had tried to embarrass and dismiss her, never imagining that her calm exterior hid a brilliant legal mind and an unwavering moral compass. Now, he was facing an investigation that could end his career, while she had earned the respect of everyone from Justice Torres to the clients she had always been committed to serving. Sometimes, May reflected as she looked out at the city lights, the quietest voice in the room turns out to be the most powerful, not because it shouts the loudest, but because it speaks the truth. 2 months after the Rodriguez settlement, the summer heat had given way to crisp fall air. May sat at an outdoor cafe across from the courthouse, reviewing documents for another case. Her phone buzzed with a message from David, the law student who had helped her. "Turn on Channel 7 News, now." May pulled up the news app on her phone, just in time to see Judge Powell exiting the courthouse, surrounded by reporters shoving microphones in his face. The caption read, "Judge resigns amid ethics investigation." "Judge Powell, do you have any comment on the allegations of bias in your courtroom?" a reporter called out. Powell's face was a rigid mask. "I've served this community for 15 years, with distinction. I categorically deny any impropriety and am confident I would be vindicated if this witch hunt continued. However, for personal reasons, I've chosen to return to private practice." Another reporter pushed forward. "Is it true the investigation uncovered financial connections between you and several development companies with cases in your court?" Powell ignored the question, pushing through the crowd to a waiting car. As he ducked inside, the camera caught a glimpse of his expression, no longer smug and confident, but bitter and defeated. May put her phone down, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, yet she took no joy in watching another person's downfall, even someone who had tried to humiliate her. The goal had always been fixing a broken system, not personal revenge. Her coffee had gone cold. As she signaled for the check, a shadow fell across her table. "Mind if I join you?" May looked up to see Thomas Wells, Bluestone's lawyer, standing there. He looked different, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes, his arrogant demeanor subdued. "That depends," May replied cautiously. "Is this a social call or legal business?" Wells sat down without waiting for a clearer invitation. "Neither, really. I suppose you've seen the news about Powell?" May nodded. "What you probably don't know is that I resigned from my firm last week." He ran a hand through his hair, which looked like it hadn't been styled in days. "The managing partner suggested I take the fall for the unfortunate handling of the Bluestone cases. Apparently I went rogue and they had no knowledge of my tactics." His laugh was hollow. "I'm sorry to hear that," May said, meaning it. "System failures rarely came down to just one person." "Don't be. It was overdue." Wells looked directly at her. "I came to say you were right. Not just about Powell, but about what we were doing at those properties. I told myself we were just following the law, but..." He trailed off. The law is supposed to protect people, not be weaponized against them. May finished quietly. Yeah. Wells was silent for a moment. Anyway, I'm starting my own practice. Taking on some pro bono cases. Thought you should know. As he stood to leave, May felt a flicker of hope. Change happened one person at a time, and sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Wells, she called after him. Everyone deserves a second chance. He nodded slightly before walking away. Back at Legal Aid that afternoon, the office was buzzing with excitement over Powell's resignation, but Helen pulled May into her office with a serious expression. We've got a problem. The Rodriguez case has made waves, and now we're being flooded with similar complaints against other judges and landlords. We don't have the resources to handle them all. May looked at the stack of case files on Helen's desk. We can't turn these people away. I agree. That's why I've been talking with the State Bar Association. They're setting up a special task force to review housing court practices, and they want you to be part of it. May blinked in surprise. Me? I'm just a... Don't say just anything, Helen interrupted. You exposed corruption that everyone knew about, but nobody challenged. The task force needs someone with both experience and courage. Before May could respond, her phone rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez. May? Something strange is happening. There are workers in our building, fixing things, that have been broken for years, and the property manager came to apologize for past misunderstandings. What did you do? May smiled. I didn't do anything new. The settlement is just being implemented. It's more than that, Mrs. Rodriguez insisted. People are treating us differently, like we matter. After the call, May sat quietly at her desk thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's words. The case had been about more than just keeping one family in their home. It had shifted the balance of power, showing that the system could be held accountable. The next morning, May received a formal invitation to join the housing court task force. As she considered the opportunity, her office phone rang again. Ms. Lynn, this is Gregory Fletcher, clerk to Justice Torres. The justice wondered if you might be available for lunch today. 2 hours later, May found herself in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant with one of the most powerful legal minds in the state. The task force is important work, Justice Torres said after they had ordered. But I invited you here to discuss something different. The governor is creating a special commission to investigate systemic discrimination in housing and lending practices statewide. He asked me to recommend someone to lead the legal team. May nearly choked on her water. And you thought of me? Justice Torres, I'm flattered, but I'm just a housing attorney with a few years' experience. The justice raised an eyebrow. You're a highly skilled lawyer who took on corruption when more experienced attorneys looked the other way. Don't underestimate what you've accomplished or what you're capable of. He slid a folder across the table. The commission would be a 2-year appointment. You'd have resources, a team, and real authority to make changes. Think about it. As May left the restaurant, her mind was spinning with possibilities. She had never sought the spotlight or dreamed of positions of influence. Her goal had always been simply to help people who needed it. But perhaps this was an opportunity to do that on a larger scale. Walking through the city park to clear her head, May spotted a familiar figure on a bench, Mr. Rodriguez, watching his grandchildren play. Mr. Rodriguez, she greeted him. How are you? His weathered face broke into a smile. Better than I ever expected to be at my age. The children can play here without me worrying about where we'll live next month. He patted the bench beside him and May sat down. I have some decisions to make about my future, she told him. Part of me wants to stay exactly where I am, helping one family at a time. Mr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. When I was young, I worked construction. One day, building a large apartment complex, I complained to my father about laying bricks all day while others made the important decisions about the building's design. You know what he told me? May shook her head. He said, without someone placing each brick carefully, the grand designs mean nothing. But sometimes the person who knows how each brick should be laid needs to help design the building. Mr. Rodriguez smiled at the memory. I'm not saying I understand exactly what choices you're facing, But I know you'll place each brick where it belongs, whether you're building one wall or designing the whole structure. That evening, May sat in her small apartment, the commission folder open on her table. Taking such a position would mean leaving her direct work with clients, the most rewarding part of her job. But it would also mean a chance to address the root causes of the problems she fought against daily. Her phone chimed with a message from David. Guess who's been appointed to fill Powell's vacant judgeship? Judge Chen, first Asian American woman on that court. May smiled. The system was changing brick by brick. The next day, she returned to the Rodriguez building to visit another client. In the lobby, she noticed something new. A large community bulletin board with notices in multiple languages, a maintenance request tracking system with clear timelines for responses, a posted copy of tenant rights under state law. As she waited for the elevator, a young woman approached her nervously. Excuse me, are you May Lin, the lawyer who helped the Rodriguez family? May nodded. I live in another Bluestone property, across town. After what happened here, they've started making changes in our building too. My grandmother asked me to thank you if I ever saw you. She said to tell you that you've given people like us a voice. The elevator arrived, but May barely noticed. Those words, a voice, crystallized something for her. Her own quiet voice had helped change things, not by shouting the loudest, but by speaking the truth persistently. Perhaps on the commission, she could amplify the voices of others who had gone unheard for too long. That afternoon, May called Justice Torres to accept the position. The next week was a whirlwind of transitions, training her replacement at legal aid, briefing colleagues on her ongoing cases, and preparing for her new role. On her last day, the legal aid office threw a small goodbye party. Helen presented her with a framed copy of the newspaper article about Powell's resignation. Don't forget where you came from, Helen said, hugging her. I won't, May promised. This isn't an ending. It's an extension of the same work. Later, she visited the Rodriguez family to tell them about her new position. They insisted she stay for dinner, and their small apartment filled with neighbors who had heard the news. Someone had made a cake with "Our Champion" written in wobbly frosting letters. As May looked around at the faces of the people she had fought for, she felt a deep certainty that she was making the right choice. The system that had allowed Judge Powell to abuse his power was larger than one courtroom or one building. It required change from within and without, from people willing to stand firm in the face of intimidation. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her glass in a toast. To May, who showed us that justice isn't just for those with money and power. May shook her head. To all of you who had the courage to fight when it would have been easier to walk away. You taught me more than I taught you. The following Monday, May walked into her new office in the state capitol building. The space was intimidatingly large after her cramped desk at legal aid, with a view of the city stretching out below. On her otherwise empty desk sat a small potted plant with a card from Justice Torres. Remember to tend to the roots while reaching for the sky. As she unpacked her few belongings, her phone rang. It was David. You'll never believe this, he said excitedly. Former Judge Powell just got hired by a major development company as their chief legal counsel. May wasn't surprised. The system protected its own. Which company? Platinum Investments. They're Bluestone's biggest competitor. May made a note of the name. Her work wasn't finished, it was just beginning. Power didn't surrender easily, and corruption had a way of finding new homes. But now she had a platform to address these issues systematically, to help rewrite the rules rather than just fighting within them. She placed Mr. Rodriguez's parting gift on her desk, a small handmade brick paperweight with the word "Justice" carved into it. One brick at a time, she thought. That's how lasting change was built. 1 year into her role on the State Housing Commission, May stood at the window of her office, watching rain streak down the glass. The view of the city skyline was impressive, but today she barely noticed it. On her desk lay a thick report, the Commission's preliminary findings after 12 months of investigations, public hearings, and data analysis. The picture it painted was both troubling and validating. What had happened in Judge Powell's courtroom wasn't an isolated incident. The commission had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory practices across multiple counties, affecting thousands of families. Biased judges, predatory landlords, and developers gaming the system had created an invisible web that kept certain communities trapped in cycles of housing instability. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Raj, her chief data analyst. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but I think you'll want to see this right away." He placed a folder on her desk and opened it to reveal property records and corporate filings. "Remember you asked me to track former Judge Powell's movements? Look at this." May scanned the documents. After being hired by Platinum Investments, Powell had been quietly appointed to the boards of 3 different real estate development companies. More concerning, all 3 had recently purchased properties in low-income neighborhoods with large immigrant populations. "They're creating a shell game," Raj explained. "Different company names, but the same business model. Push out current residents, renovate, raise rents, and look who's handling their court cases." He pointed to a case listing. The attorney of record was Thomas Wells. May frowned. "I thought he had changed." "People rarely change completely," Raj said with a shrug. "But there's more. The cases are all being assigned to Judge Harriman, Powell's old friend." May felt a familiar tension in her shoulders. The same patterns were repeating, just with new players. The system was adapting to protect itself. "Thank you, Raj. Can you get me the court dates for these cases?" After he left, May called Justice Torres, now her most trusted advisor. "It's not surprising," he said after she explained the situation. "People like Powell don't simply disappear. They find new avenues to exert influence." "What do I do?" "The commission's mandate doesn't include intervening in specific court cases." "Perhaps not directly," Torres replied thoughtfully. "But remember, why the governor created this commission in the first place, because of the public attention one case generated. Sometimes sunlight is the best disinfectant." The next morning, May did something unprecedented. She called a press conference. Standing before a room of reporters, cameras, and community activists, she felt a flutter of nerves. Public speaking had never been her strength. She preferred the quiet precision of legal briefs to the theater of press events. But some battles couldn't be fought from the shadows. The State Housing Commission was established to investigate and address systemic discrimination in our housing courts and real estate practices. She began, her voice gathering strength with each word. "Today, I'm releasing our preliminary findings, which document disturbing patterns of bias affecting vulnerable communities across our state." She outlined the Commission's key discoveries: statistical evidence showing significantly higher eviction rates for certain racial and ethnic groups, financial connections between judges and developers that created conflicts of interest, and the economic impacts of displacement on communities. "But perhaps most concerning," she continued, "is evidence that even as we work to address these issues, the same patterns are emerging in new forms." Without naming Powell directly, she described how former officials implicated in judicial misconduct were now working with development companies targeting the same vulnerable communities. She announced a new public database that would track property ownership, development plans, and court cases, making the connections transparent. "Sunshine laws exist because our democracy functions best when citizens can see how power operates," she concluded. This commission's work isn't just about finding problems. It's about empowering communities with information to advocate for themselves. The press conference generated exactly the response May had hoped for. News outlets began investigating the connections she had hinted at. Community organizations mobilized to monitor the cases Raj had identified, and lawmakers started discussing potential reforms to judicial assignment procedures. 2 days later, May's assistant rushed into her office. "Judge Harriman just announced he's recusing himself from all cases involving Platinum Investments and its subsidiaries, citing public concerns about the appearance of impartiality." It was a small victory, but significant. When powerful people knew they were being watched, they became more cautious. That evening, May received an unexpected visitor, David, the law student who had helped her with the Rodriguez case. He had graduated now and was working at legal aid. "I wanted to deliver this in person," he said, handing her a large envelope. Inside was an invitation to a community celebration at the Rodriguez building. "It's the 1-year anniversary of the settlement," David explained. "They've formed a tenant association that now serves as a model for other buildings. Mrs. Rodriguez thought you might want to see what your work has helped create." May was touched. In the intensity of her commission work, she sometimes lost sight of the real people affected by these issues. "I wouldn't miss it." The celebration was held in the building's renovated community room, now bright and welcoming with fresh paint and new furniture. Residents had brought food representing their diverse cultural backgrounds, creating a feast that filled long tables. Children played in one corner while elders chatted in another. The walls were covered with photographs documenting the building's transformation. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted May with a warm hug. "Look around. This is what happens when people find their voice." As May circulated through the room, residents shared their stories. One elderly man had started a garden in the building's previously neglected courtyard. A young mother had organized after-school homework help for the building's children. A teenager proudly explained the new recycling program he had implemented. "None of this would have happened without you," Mrs. Rodriguez said. May shook her head. "I just helped remove some obstacles. You all did the real work." "Perhaps," Mrs. Rodriguez replied with a knowing smile. "But sometimes removing obstacles is the most important work of all." Later, as the celebration continued, Mr. Rodriguez pulled May aside. "There's someone who wants to speak with you." He led her to a quiet corner where an elegantly dressed older woman waited. It took May a moment to recognize her, Judge Diane Chen, who had approved their settlement. "Your Honor," May said in surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." Judge Chen smiled. "I make a point of following up on cases that matter. May we speak privately?" They found a quiet spot near a window overlooking the courtyard, where children were playing tag in the evening light. "I saw your press conference," Judge Chen said. "Bold move." "Was it too bold?" May asked, suddenly concerned about potential political backlash. "Not at all. In fact, it's why I'm here." Judge Chen lowered her voice. "The Chief Justice is forming a committee to revise our state's judicial ethics guidelines. Your commission's findings have made quite an impression." May listened carefully as Judge Chen explained that the committee would be examining everything from how judges were assigned to cases to financial disclosure requirements. "We need someone with both an understanding of the problems and the courage to address them," Judge Chen concluded. "The Chief Justice asked me to sound you out about joining the committee." May felt a momentary hesitation. Her commission work was demanding enough, and this would be another commitment. But the opportunity to help reshape the rules that governed judicial conduct was too important to pass up. "I'd be honored," she said. Judge Chen nodded approvingly. "I thought you might say that. We begin next month." As the judge departed, May found herself back among the celebration. She watched as residents shared food, stories, and laughter, a community strengthened by their shared struggle and victory. David appeared at her side with a plate of food. "You know, I decided to specialize in housing law because of the Rodriguez case," he told her. "A lot of us did. You've inspired a whole new generation of lawyers." May smiled, thinking about how much had changed since she first walked into Judge Powell's courtroom. She had entered as a target for his contempt, seen as an easy mark because of her quiet demeanor and modest appearance. He had tried to humiliate her, never imagining that her apparent meekness masked a brilliant legal mind and an unwavering moral compass. Now Powell was scrambling for new ways to exert influence while she was helping to rewrite the rules of the system he had abused. The work wasn't finished, it might never be, but the balance of power had shifted. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Rodriguez gathered everyone for a toast. "To justice," she said simply, raising her glass. "To justice," the room echoed. Later, walking home through the quiet streets, May reflected on her journey. From the moment she had overheard Judge Powell and Wells talking before that first hearing, she had known she was facing a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The easier path would have been to accept those limitations to work within them as best she could. Instead, she had chosen to challenge them, not with dramatic confrontations or grand speeches, but with meticulous preparation, strategic thinking, and quiet persistence. Her strength had never been in raising her voice, but in knowing when and how to use it effectively. The next morning, back at her commission office, May reviewed the latest draft of proposed housing reforms that would go to the legislature. They addressed many of the issues her team had identified: rent stabilization, eviction protections, conflict of interest rules for judges. Raj knocked and entered with fresh coffee. "Big day today. The governor's office called. They want to fast-track our recommendations." May nodded, taking the cup gratefully. "And Justice Torres just called. The Judicial Ethics Committee is adding financial disclosure requirements for judges' extended family members." "All because you embarrassed one corrupt judge," Raj said with admiration. "No," May corrected gently. "All because one family refused to be bullied out of their home, and others followed their example." She turned back to the window, looking out at the city. Not just the gleaming towers of downtown, but the neighborhoods beyond, where people fought daily battles for dignity and security. In one of those buildings, Mrs. Rodriguez was probably preparing for her tenant association meeting. In another, David was likely preparing for court, armed with both legal knowledge and moral purpose. Change happened slowly, unevenly, with victories and setbacks along the way. But it did happen, especially when people who had been underestimated found their power. May returned to her desk and opened her laptop. There was still so much work to do. But now she wasn't doing it alone, and the quiet woman whom no one had noticed had found her voice.